Anyone who grew up riding the rails can probably still recall the sound. That steady beat beneath the wheels. A ta-tuck, 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 rising from the joints where one rail section met the next. Every gap announcing itself the instant a wheel rolled across. Ride a modern high-speed train today, and the sound has vanished. The trip feels smooth, nearly silent at rail level. Something in the track shifted, and hardly any passenger stops to wonder what. Gapped rail's natural replacement is continuous welded rail, lengths fused end to end into one unbroken ribbon. Yet heat makes steel grow. That isn't a theory, it's a physical certainty. Sitting under a summer sun, a rail lengthens. And if it can't lengthen, then something else has to give. So what gives? Why doesn't a track that seems to shrug off thermal expansion just buckle in the heat? Let's dig into that right here on Small Things. Once, that gap was everywhere. Through most of the history of railways, track was assembled from individual rail sections around 12 meters long, bolted end to end with a purposeful gap of a few millimeters left between them. Continuous welded rail swaps that, for something cleaner yet far more demanding, sections welded into one unbroken line, sometimes stretching kilometers with no joint at all. There's no gap left for the rail to expand into. As the temperature climbs and the steel strains to grow, it can't lengthen. As it falls, the steel can't shrink. That ta-tuck, the signature of rail travel for a century, was simply the noise those joints made. Its vanishing marks a deep shift in how thermal expansion gets dealt with. The answer wasn't to hand the rail room to shift, but to deny it any room whatsoever. Why no one was willing to take the gaps out. Long after thermite welding appeared, permanently fusing railway rails together struck most people as plainly reckless. The figures did nothing to calm the nerves. Raise the temperature by 40 degrees Celsius, and a 12-meter rail stretches roughly 6 millimeters. On its own, that's trivial. Spread it across kilometers of linked track, though, and engineers pictured forces strong enough to shove rails clean off their sleepers. A longer continuous rail meant a bigger compressive force building in the summer heat. By that logic, an endless rail was an endless headache. Railway managers pushed back completely. When Hans Goldschmidt worked out thermite welding late in the 19th century, offering a way to bond rail sections with molten steel, the trade brushed him aside. To them, gaps weren't a defect awaiting a cure. They were treated as vital to running safely. In effect, Goldschmidt was asking railroads to surrender the one safety valve they had against the very force that scared them most. The consensus first cracked not on the main lines, but among the tram networks in cities. Trams rode on lighter, slimmer rail set into the pavement. The forces at play stayed gentler, and in the heart of a city, the annoyance of that ta-tuck grew harder to tolerate. Essen ranked among the first cities to try doing away with rail gaps, and the outcomes there and elsewhere proved promising enough to move the debate along. What slowly won the main lines over wasn't proof that thermal expansion had been beaten, but the realization that it could be handled another way. Rather than leaving the rail somewhere to grow, engineers discovered they could pin it down and convert that expansion into internal stress. So long as the stress held within limits the rail could tolerate, the track would stay put. Arriving at that idea demanded time and hard evidence. Years of tram service that never buckled catastrophically, plus meticulous measurement of forces inside restrained rail under real temperature swings, built a case the doubters found tough to wave off. Take-up came slowly, differing by nation and by type of line. Yet, by the middle of the 20th century, continuous welded rail had settled in as routine on a great many of the world's railways, while jointed track came to look more and more like the old way rather than the safe one. The gap wasn't wiped out. The whole problem was re-engineered. Making that restraint practical, though, took more than a change of mind. It leaned on a quieter revolution in the track itself, heavier rail that resisted bending, concrete sleepers far weightier than the old timber ones, and spring steel clips that gripped the rail firmly without ever working loose. Without that sturdier, heavier track to pin the steel down, the very forces the engineers feared really would have flung the rail off the line. How steel gets held in place without any gaps. Think of a rail under the summer sun as a metal ruler itching to get longer. Leave both ends loose, and it grows. Clamp both ends down hard, and it can't. Pressure gathers inside the metal instead. The rail strains against whatever is holding it, and engineers name that straining force compressive stress. Within a continuous welded rail track, the holding falls to the sleepers and the ballast. Sleepers are those concrete or timber beams the rails rest upon, pinned to each rail with metal clips. Ballast is the bed of crushed stone the sleepers are seated in. Between them, they clamp the rail with such friction and heft that any push to lengthen or bow sideways gets nowhere. A detail hides in that ballast. The crushed stone is heaped a little higher and wider past the ends of the sleepers, forming what track crews call the ballast shoulder. And it is this shoulder that supplies most of the sideways resistance keeping a hot rail straight. It also explains a quirk of the work. Freshly tamped or relayed track, its stone loosened and not yet packed down by traffic, offers far less of that resistance, which is why crews drop speed limits on new work until the ballast bed's back in. There is a slower drift to fight as well, since the steady pounding of traffic tends to make rails creep bodily along the line in the direction the trains run, and the same clips and stone that swallow the thermal stress are what pin that creep down too. What would otherwise be visible motion becomes unseen stress locked in the metal. This holds up because steel acts elastically as long as it stays within certain bounds. Squeeze it a moderate amount and it presses back yet keeps its form. Ease off the squeeze and it springs to its former size. Nothing about the rail is permanently bent out of shape. It merely sits under load, much as a compressed spring sits under load, and it will remain loaded for as long as the temperature holds above the neutral temperature. Handling all this safely hinges on a thing called the neutral temperature. As a continuous rail goes in, or whenever its stress gets tuned, engineers pick a target temperature where the rail should carry neither compression nor tension. Typically, it sits a bit above the location's average yearly temperature, since too much summer compression is worse than too much winter tension. In temperate railways, the stress-free point is often placed around 27 degrees Celsius, and higher still where summers turn brutal. Hitting that target is a physical job, not a figure left on paper. If the rail is laid on a cold morning, well below where its neutral temperature ought to sit, crews cannot simply clip it down as it lies, or it would spend every summer dangerously overcompressed. Instead, they stretch it. Hydraulic rail tensors grip the steel and haul it out to the length it would reach at the chosen neutral temperature, and only then is it fastened to the sleepers, so the rail is effectively preset to behave as though that warmer day were its resting state. Sink below the neutral mark and the rail longs to contract but can't. It's drawn into tension. Rise past it, and the rail longs to expand but can't. It's driven into compression. One state or the other always has hold of the rail. That neutral temperature is the tuned balance point, meant to keep both states safely bounded across the entire span of temperatures the track will meet over its working life. The stress went nowhere. People most often assume that continuous welded rail, by getting rid of the gap, put the thermal expansion problem to rest. It didn't. The thing just turned invisible, sealed inside the metal instead of showing at every joint as an open gap. Not quite every gap is gone, mind you. At a handful of special places, the rail is still allowed to move, chiefly on long bridges, whose decks expand and shift on their own, and at the transitions where welded track meets older jointed line. There, engineers fit breather switches, tapered sliding joints that let a measured amount of expansion happen on purpose, soaking up the movement the restrained rail on either side refuses to allow. On a scorching summer afternoon, the rail in a continuous welded track carries compressive stress hefty enough to measure. On a freezing winter night, it carries tension. Neither state ever disappears. Both are simply kept in check. And that distinction counts, because kept in check is not the same as guaranteed. Let maintenance work or flooding disturb the ballast, and it surrenders part of its hold on the sleepers. Let a heat wave drive temperatures past whatever the track was built to take, and the compressive stress overruns the system's power to contain it. Let the neutral temperature be set wrong at installation, and the rail opens every season already in the wrong state. Every one of those cases lets the stress that had been penned up internally break loose, and the outcome is the same one it always was. The rail slides sideways. Railroaders have a name for that hot weather failure, a sun kink, and its threat is why a severe heat wave brings out slow orders and heat patrols, crews riding the line to spot a rail beginning to wander before a train meets it at speed. Winter carries the opposite danger. When the cold hauls a restrained rail hard into tension, any hidden crack or worn bolt hole turns into a weak point, and the rail can snap clean through, tearing open a gap where none should be. That kind of pull-apart is the cold season mirror of the summer buckle, born of tension instead of compression, and both trace back to the same locked-in stress the smooth ride hides. Buckling has not gone away on today's railways. It's rarer, because the engineering reigning in the stress is now deliberate and exact rather than missing altogether. But it remains possible. So after any serious disturbance to the track bed, engineers have to confirm the rail's stress state before trains roll once more. A smooth ride doesn't announce that the fight is finished. It announces that the fight is being won, for now. Molten steel and a smoother ride. Two things, in the end, are what let continuous welded rail work out on the ground. The first is the welding, and in practice it happens in two very different settings. Most of it is done off the line, inside rail welding plants, where a machine butts two rail ends together, drives a huge electric current through them until the steel glows white hot, and forges them into one under enormous pressure. A technique called flash butt welding that leaves a joint often stronger than the parent rail. These plant-welded strings, hundreds of meters long, ride out to the site on special trains and are laid down nearly continuous already. What is left is to stitch those long strings together where they meet and to mend broken rail in place. And for that, the field crews turn to the older craft of thermite welding. A narrow gap is cut between the rail ends. Around it, a mold is clamped. In a crucible perched above the mold, a blend of aluminum powder and iron oxide is set alight. This does not merely burn. It drives a fierce reaction in which the aluminum rips the oxygen away from the iron oxide, and what it leaves behind is a pool of nearly pure molten iron, with a lighter slag of aluminum oxide floating clear on top. The rail ends are preheated first, so the incoming metal bonds cleanly rather than chilling the instant it lands. That reaction throws off molten steel hotter than 2,000 degrees Celsius, which runs down into the gap and fuses to the rail ends on both sides. Once it cools and the mold comes off, two once separate rails have become a single continuous piece. Crews grind the joint smooth until it is indistinguishable from the rail around it. A passing train wheel senses nothing at all. This is what wiped out the Tatak. Roughly 2 million welds like this are laid down every year across the globe, yielding about 50 kilometers of fresh continuous rail annually out of molten steel poured straight onto the track bed. The second thing is what continuous welded rail opens up for the ride itself. With no gaps arriving at regular intervals, there are no regular impacts either. Wheel wear falls off sharply. The spacing between track maintenance jobs stretches out. Trains can push faster and skip the vibration that jointed track would hammer through the carriage at speed. To the passengers, it registers as smoothness and hush, none of them aware of the compressive stress being handled unseen in the rail below. Everything that flows from a smoother, quieter, quicker ride circles back to that one choice: hold the rail fast and keep the stress inside. Not gone, just controlled. So why is it that train tracks carry no gaps anymore, and why won't continuous welded rail buckle in the summer? Picture that train window one more time. The rhythm that once clocked every trip has fallen quiet. Modern track doesn't overlook thermal expansion, it governs it. The rails still yearn to expand and contract, but rather than scattering open gaps, engineers pin them down with sleepers, ballast, and a neutral temperature picked with care. Out of that comes a smoother, quieter, faster railway, and not because the steel quit moving, but because its motion was converted into controlled internal stress. That smooth ride is anything but simple. It's a managed struggle against heat, playing out unseen in the metal under every journey. If this shifted how you picture the next train ride you take, tell us down in the comments what you'd like us to look into next. It might become our next episode. Thanks for watching. History so often hides in the smallest details.